Two young girls were walking the rusted rails of Ash Hollow, hunting for scraps of metal, for discarded cans, for anything at all that could help keep their small, fragile family alive. When their loyal German shepherd, Shiloh, suddenly stopped. His head low, his ears locked forward, he had caught a scent. It was a warning. And then came the sound that would change everything. The distant, mournful rumble of an approaching freight train. Muffled, almost human cry coming from the tracks just ahead. What they were about to find, tied and left for dead, beneath the coming roar of steel, wasn't just a deputy. It was a life, dangling by a few precious seconds. A dark story, buried under a town's long and very heavy silence and soot. Followed was more than just a rescue. It was the first small crack of a light in a town that had long been forgotten by mercy. A story of sisters, of secrets, and of the profound and very real miracle of finally being seen. Before we begin this incredible journey, do you know someone in your own life, a friend, a family member, who would walk through danger right beside? Their loyal, four-legged friend? Drop their name in the comments below. We would love to honor those quiet, everyday heroes. And if you believe that even the smallest, most forgotten voices deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button, right? Now, the tale you're about to hear just might remind you that sometimes God sends his angels with paws. The morning air in Ash Hollow carried the unmistakable bite of late October, dry, brittle kind of cold that clung to denim cuffs and cracked lips. A weak sun struggled behind the veil of pale clouds, casting a faded yellow light across the neglected hills of West Virginia. Once a bustling coal town, Ash Hollow now lay quiet and frayed at the edges, where rusted silos groaned in the wind and freight trains passed through without ever stopping. June and Joanie Keene, twin sisters of 11 years old, walked in silence along the warped railroad tracks that cut through the wooded outskirts of town. Their faces, identical in shape, but not in expression, bore the thin, sun-roughened skin of children who'd spent more days under the open and often unforgiving skies than they have in a school. June, the quieter of the two, had a calm, almost unnerving steadiness about her. Her dark brown hair was braided neatly down both sides, tucked under a faded olive-green beanie. Her green jacket was a size too large, with one sleeve perpetually rolled up to free her writing hand.
Ow.
A thinker, a watcher, and she was often the one who noticed things first. Joanie, a half an inch taller and a single heartbeat quicker, carried herself like someone who was always leaning forward into the wind. Her own cheeks were often flushed with a restless energy, her hands always fidgeting with the small found treasures of her world, scraps of metal, old bottle caps, bits of colored wire. Her own hair was tied in the same neat braids as her sister's, but hers were looser, half undone from a constant and very necessary motion. She had a sharpness to her, not from a cruelty, but from a necessity. She was a girl who had learned, from a very young age, how to speak fast. Before the grown-ups had a chance to change their minds, trailing just ahead of them was Shiloh, 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat that was dulled by the dust and the sun. He walked with a slight, almost imperceptible limp in his left hind leg, a lingering and very painful consequence of an old injury that no one in their family had ever had the money to properly treat. His ears, however, were always alert, and his sharp, intelligent nose worked the breeze constantly. Shiloh had been their mother's dog before her lungs had finally given out, and she had, with one of her last weak breaths, handed over the leash, figuratively anyway, to her two beloved daughters. He was their guardian now, scarred but fiercely and completely loyal. Behind them, the small, forgotten town was still stirring awake. Maggie Keene sat hunched in a chair by the window of their small two-room house. Her coughs came in waves, a dry, stabbing sound that was a constant and very grim reminder of the coal dust that had settled so deep in her own failing lungs. But she refused to lie down. Small, beautiful embroidery hoops she sold at the local flea market didn't bring in much money, but they brought in enough to keep her girls from having to beg. Her latest piece was nearly done. 3 small wildflowers stitched in a simple glass mason jar. She squinted at the intricate and very difficult pattern and whispered, "Hold still, damn it," to her own trembling fingers, not to the thread. A few hundred feet ahead, the tracks curved slightly around a small, overgrown embankment, and beyond it, nestled right in the middle of the rusted steel rails, was a man. He was tied hand and foot, his head slumped forward onto his chest, a thick black cloth wrapped so tightly around his eyes and his mouth that it looked as if he were already a part of the shadows. Joanie gasped, a small, sharp, and very terrified sound. "Oh, God," she whispered. Shiloh barked once, circled the man, and then barked again, a louder, sharper sound this time. "Don't just stand there, Joanie," June shouted. "Help me." They rushed forward, their own knees buckling slightly as they reached the man. He was tall and muscular under all the dirt and the blood, and he was wearing a tan, sheriff's deputy uniform that was stained dark at the collar. A small silver badge glinted from beneath a smear of mud on his chest. Deputy Elias Rowe. Joanie fumbled at the thick and very tight knots around his ankles. "He's alive," she said, her own voice a mixture of a dawning and very real relief and a new and very different kind of a fear. I think he's warm." June tugged the gag from his mouth. Elias groaned, a faint, almost inaudible sound, his own throat rasping like dry gravel. "I know." June's own fingers were raw, bleeding as she scraped them against the thick, unforgiving nylon of the rope. "Pull his legs, Joanie. Just pull." Joanie yanked with all of her small but very mighty strength. Elias moaned, a low and very painful sound, but he didn't resist. The train's horn began to wail then, a long, low, and very mournful sound that was still distant, but was now coming, with a terrifying and very real speed, much, much faster. They had less than a minute. "Shiloh, come on," June cried, as she, finally, and with a great heaving sob of a pure and very desperate relief, managed to get one of his arms free. The dog, as if he had understood her command, growled low in his throat, and then, with a surprising and very powerful gentleness, he gripped the thick, tough fabric of the man's uniform at the shoulder with his teeth. He was not biting. He was anchoring. He began to drag. June and Joanie pulled with everything they had, their small, worn-out boots scraping and slipping on the loose gravel of the tracks. Elias's own heavy body was a dead weight, a silent and very real anchor, to a fate that was now just seconds away. 30 seconds. They cleared the first rail, then the next, and just as the girls fell back, panting and shaking and sobbing onto the muddy embankment, the train thundered past, a monstrous and very final burst of a pure, unadulterated steel, and wind, the deafening, screaming noise of it splitting the quiet morning air like a scream. Elias blinked once, and then again, his own mind slowly and very painfully beginning to surface from the deep, dark well of his unconsciousness. "What?" he whispered, the single word a dry and very broken sound. "What happened?" Lean leaned over him, her own small face now streaked with a mixture of tears and dirt. "You're safe," she said. "You're out." "Right. We got you out." Joanie sat back on the hard, sharp rocks, her own hands now shaking so violently she could barely control them, her palms sliced and bleeding from the rough, abrasive fibers of the rope and the sharp, unforgiving edges of the metal rails. She looked at Shiloh. "You saved him, boy," she whispered. Shiloh just licked her wrist, once a small and very gentle gesture of a pure and very real comfort. And then he lay down beside Elias, a silent and very faithful guardian. Elias. Rowe awoke in a room that was washed in a dusty, golden light. For a long, silent moment, he didn't know where he was, just knew that he was breathing, and that someone, somewhere, had tried very, very hard to make sure that he wouldn't be. Pain, a sharp and very real pain, crawled down his ribs like a thorny and very persistent ivy. He tried to move, he winced, and then he exhaled a short, broken, and very beautiful laugh. "Still alive," he muttered. The clinic nurse, a young and very no-nonsense woman named Lena Rollins, heard him and entered the room quietly. She had the deep brown skin and the tightly coiled black hair of a woman whose own roots ran deep in these West Virginia hills. She was tall and lean, her posture alert, but her eyes, her beautiful dark eyes, were kind. "You're lucky," she said without any ceremony, as she checked his vitals. A few more minutes on those tracks, and this would have been a recovery, not a rescue. Elias blinked slowly. "The girls," he said. "The dog. Are they?" "They're fine," she replied, as she adjusted his fore. "They came in to check on you earlier, but we couldn't let them stay. You need your rest. And they," she added, her own voice now a little softer, a little sadder, "they need to go back to surviving." He tried to sit up. "Need to see them," he said. Lena's eyebrow arched, just slightly, but she said nothing. She just handed him a folded and slightly crumpled slip of paper. "The older one," she said. "She gave me this," she said. "If he wakes up, you read it to him." Elias opened it with one very unsteady hand. Written in an awkward and very tight childish handwriting were the words, "We didn't know what else to do. Sorry about your head. June and Joanie. P.S. Shiloh says hi." And Elias, for the very first time, smiled. Slow and very tired and very beautiful smile. He followed the directions Lena had scribbled, winding up a steep, gravelly hill that was lined with crumbling old mailboxes and rusted barbed wire fences. The Keene house sat at the very edge of the wood line, a small two-room cabin that seemed to be hunched under the weight of its own rusted tin roof. It was surrounded by a small and very wild garden. Moss, a vibrant and very determined green, grew between the old porch boards, and the screen door hung a little crookedly on its hinges. He knocked a gentle, hesitant sound. A child's voice from inside called out, "Wait," and the door a moment later creaked open. June stood in the doorway, one of her beautiful hazel eyes squinting from the sudden bright intrusion of the afternoon sunlight, the other full of a new and very wary kind of a look. "It's you," she said, her own voice a quiet and very matter-of-fact sound. "Deputy Elias Rowe." He nodded. I owe you a lot more than just a simple thank you." June just stepped aside. "You'd better come in," she said, "before my mama sees you standing out there and thinks you're the bill collector." Looked up slowly as he entered, her own face pale and hollowed out by her illness. But her eyes, her beautiful hazel eyes, were still sharp and very intelligent. Maggie was 38, tall and naturally lean, though her long and very difficult illness had made her appear gaunt and very fragile. Her dark brown hair, once so thick and so glossy, was now tied in a loose, practical knot, and a single, elegant streak of a pure silver gray ran through one side. Her skin was pale from so much time spent indoors, her cheekbones prominent. She had once been an electrician for a local and very successful firm, before she had fallen from a scaffold 2 years ago, shattering her collarbone and bruising a lung. The pain had never really left her, neither had the dry hacking cough that so often followed. "You're the man my girls pulled off the tracks," she said, her own voice a little raspy, but steady. Joanie peeked out from behind the hallway curtain then, her own eyes wide, but her grin, when she saw him, was crooked and very sure. "You don't look dead anymore," she said. "I don't feel dead anymore," he replied. Shiloh, their brave and very silent guardian, padded into the room then and stood beside him, his tail wagging, once, a single, happy gesture, before he sat like a statue. At his side, Elias crouched a little stiffly and scratched the dog behind his ears. "You again, hero?" he said. Maggie set her needle down. "We didn't expect a visit," she said. Elias hesitated. "I didn't come empty-handed," he said. He stepped back toward the door and returned with a large brown paper sack. "From the clinic," he said. "Some food supplies, soup, beans, fruit, some first aid things. And," he added, "a voucher for your next checkup at the free clinic downtown." Maggie stiffened, her pride a silent and very powerful shield. "We didn't ask for charity, Deputy," she said. "No, ma'am," he said softly. "You earned help." "I am not giving you charity. I am repaying a debt." That evening, over a simple meal of boiled eggs, onion-fried potatoes, and a weak but very warm tea, Elias learned more about the real and very hidden life of Ash Hollow than he had in his entire 5 years of patrol. He learned about how Joanie had once fallen from the top of the old, abandoned water tower, all while she was just chasing after a single and very shiny bottle cap. Learned about June's quiet and very brilliant habit of mapping out every single hidden trash route and resale bin in the entire town. And he learned about how Shiloh, their brave and very loyal Shiloh, had been born right under Maggie's own bed. During the last brutal winter, when they had still, and only just, had enough heating oil to keep from freezing. Afterward, as the girls were clearing the dishes, Elias leaned a little closer to Maggie. What they did, he said, it wasn't just brave, it was right. But I can't ignore what it means. Maggie nodded already, and with a mother's deep and very painful intuition, knowing. Someone wanted you gone, she said. Yes, he said. I've dealt with criminals before, even scumbags. But this was different. They didn't want to rob me, they wanted silence. He paused, his own voice now dropping to a low and very serious whisper. I'm reporting this to the FBI, he said. I think it might be connected to those other missing girls from the area. Part 4, Joanie Keene squatted at the base of a rusted iron post where the tracks forked, her small, clad hands working to pry something from beneath a pile of old nails and broken glass. June stood a few feet away, her own quieter eyes sweeping the gravel, Shiloh padding behind her with slow, sniffing steps. They hadn't expected to find anything worthwhile this far out. This section of the line hadn't carried a freight train in years, but their mother's cough had been worse that morning, a dry, hacking sound that seemed to echo the hollowness in their own empty pantry. In desperation, as it so often does, had a way of pushing them beyond their old, familiar boundaries. The object Joanie uncovered wasn't just another piece of scrap metal. It was a small wooden box, maybe the size of a shoebox, banded with tarnished brass corners and stained so dark with age and weather that it almost blended into the damp, dark earth. The hinges were rusted shut. You think it's worth anything? She asked, turning it over in her hands. June tilted her head. It looks too rotted to be worth much. Still, Joanie finished, her voice a low and very determined sound. Someone left it out here for a reason. They brought it home in the same burlap sack they used for collecting cans, thinking that maybe it had hidden old coins or forgotten tools inside. But it wasn't until that evening when Elias, who had now made it a quiet and very welcome habit to stop by after his shifts to drop off canned milk and a spare flashlight, the box revealed its true and very heavy weight. Elias crouched, his own strong fingers brushing against the worn and very familiar insignia on the lid. It was a faded and very old crest of a pickaxe, crossed with a single burning flame. He exhaled, a slow, sharp sound through his nose. Red Pine Company, he said. June's eyes narrowed. That's the old mining place, right? It's the one that closed down? Yes, Elias said, his own voice now a grim and very serious sound. 20 years ago. After a federal investigation into forced labor and illegal confinement, but most of the case files, they were sealed. He ran a thumb along the brass band of the box. And this, he said, this mark, ... It was not on any of the company's public logos. This is internal. Maggie, who had been listening from her recliner, spoke up then, her own voice a little weak from her coughing, but full of a new and very real sense of a deep and very personal dread. That box, she said, it gives me a bad feeling. Inside, under layers of crumbling old paper and a single oil-soaked rag, was a folded piece of parchment. Elias unfolded it carefully, revealing a hand-drawn map. Sections of the map were labeled with faded and very cryptic notations. Tunnels were marked in a stark red ink, and one single symbol was repeated over and over again, a small, simple triangle drawn inside of a circle. What's that symbol mean? Joanie asked, leaning over his shoulder. I don't know, Elias admitted, but I will find out. Before leaving, Elias had given them a simple and very serious instruction. If anyone, and I mean anyone, asks you about that box, you have never seen it? Understood? Both girls had nodded. While he was gone, Joanie had walked to school with a new and very heavy knot in her chest. In her backpack, tucked between her worn-out textbooks and her simple sack lunch, was a printout that their teacher had handed out the week before. It was a series of black and white photographs of missing children. Children who had been collected by state investigators for a new Awareness Week campaign. Miss Delaney, their quiet and very kind school librarian and one of the few adults in the entire town that Joanie truly and completely respected, had distributed them with a quiet and very sad care. Joanie stared at one of the photos more than the others. The girl in the picture was about 17, with long, tangled hair, deep-set, haunted eyes, and a small, crooked smile. Her name was listed as Ruby Keene, the same last name, though Joanie knew, with a small-town practical wisdom, that didn't necessarily mean much in a town that was so full of scattered and often very broken kin. Still, something about the girl's eyes, the way she looked as if she were holding back a secret, a laugh, a pain, or perhaps all three, had stuck. With her? That night, Joanie snuck into the back corner of their bedroom, where Maggie kept an old metal cookie tin. She cracked it open with a butter knife. Inside were old, folded receipts, scraps of paper, and, near the bottom, a letter that had never been sent. Dear Ruby, it read. I know they say it's foolish to write to you, but I have to. Your sisters, they ask about you now and then, more in the quiet than aloud. I tell them that you were bright, that you liked shiny things, that you braided my hair better than I could ever do yours. I remember the way you used to hum when you thought no one was listening. And I pray every single night that you are still humming somewhere. Joanie read the note twice. Then she found a photograph behind it, slightly faded, taken long before she and June were born. In it stood a young girl, maybe 7 years old, hugging a woman with familiar and very sad eyes. Ruby, Joanie placed the letter and the photograph back in the tin, slid it under the floorboard again. Didn't say a word to June, not yet. Meanwhile, Elias returned from Charleston with a tense jaw and sharper eyes. At the FBI field office, his contact had recognized the symbol on the map, a holding marker, used during pre-transfer operations for undocumented trafficking victims. The site on the map aligned with a no-defunct Red Pine mine shaft, a shaft that had been officially sealed, but had never been formally demolished. He stood outside the Keene home that evening, watching the girls peel potatoes by the window. Shiloh curled up under the porch. He knew he had to go back to that mine. Not with just a flashlight this time, but with permission, with backup, and with answers. But first, he had to find out if the girl named Ruby was more than just another name on a missing persons poster. The map had led them here. The scents, the trails, the hollow, and very inhuman echoes of a quiet and very profound suffering. All of it had pointed towards something that was buried, something that was sealed. At the edge of the woods, a steep and very treacherous slope of a hard gray stone disguised the real and very secret entrance. It was not an entrance that was built for carts or for workers. It was an entrance that was built for secrecy. Shiloh stood at the mouth of a dark and very narrow tunnel, his tail low, his body stiff. He was barking now, not a loud, frantic bark, but a persistent, sharp, and very urgent one. Mara Whitaker, ever composed, crouched beside him, her gloved hand resting lightly on his withers. He's got something, she said. Elias approached from behind, his own rifle now slung over his shoulder, his flashlight angled low. The other agents fanned out in a silent and very professional semicircle, their own breath pluming in the frigid morning air. That door, Elias murmured, pointing to a square metal panel that had been built into the rock wall. It wasn't on any of the original company plans. The steel was newer than the rest of the mine. Keypad had been scorched. The hinges blackened. Someone had tried to burn their way in or out. Either scenario was sickening. Inside was a silence that was even heavier. It's more profound than the silence of the winter woods above. They entered single file. Shiloh first, then Mara, then Elias. The air shifted from a cold and very damp to a stale and very thick, with the smell of mildew and of rust. The corridor bent, then widened. And in the center of the small, cavernous room, beneath a single, flickering, and very bare light bulb, were three small, huddled figures, wrapped in thin, gray blankets. Two of them flinched at the sudden intrusion of the light. But the third, the girl in the middle, she looked up slowly, a quiet and very powerful defiance flickering in her bloodshot and very haunted eyes. She was perhaps 17 now, tall but too thin, her limbs awkward with a half-grown and very real strength. Her hair was a dark, tangled brown, but it fell in familiar, gentle waves over her shoulders. Her cheek was bruised, her lips were split. But when she spoke, her voice didn't tremble. "Don't touch them," she said. "I'm the one you want." Mara stepped forward carefully, her own badge now visible, her voice a low and very calm and very reassuring sound. "You are not in trouble," she said. "We are here to take you home." The girl's gaze flicked between Mara, Elias, and then finally to Shiloh, whose head was now tilted just slightly, with a strange and very familiar look of a pure canine curiosity. "Is this real?" she whispered, her own voice now a little broken. I've had this dream before." It was Elias who knelt down then. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked. "Ruby," she said, the name barely louder than a breath. "Ruby Keene, but they made me call myself Sarah for years." The courthouse in Ash Hollow hadn't seen this many people in years. Winter still clung to the edges of the town square, like a secret that was unwilling to let go. But inside, the heavy stone building, a new and very different kind of warmth radiated from the tense and very final finality of the room. Caleb Dorn, who had once been the town's all-powerful sheriff, and who was now a man who had been stripped of all of his badges and all of his illusions, sat handcuffed at the defense table. Judge Miriam Hawthorne, an older woman with steel-gray hair and a tight, unforgiving bun and a pair of glasses that never ever seemed to slip, presided. Her voice, when she spoke, carried no malice. It carried only the quiet and very heavy weight of the law. "For your crimes," she said, "of human trafficking, of kidnapping, of obstruction of justice, and of a criminal conspiracy, this court sentences you to 45 years in a state penitentiary, without the possibility of parole." Caleb didn't speak. He just stared at Elias, at the girls, at the wall behind them, as if he were hoping, with a last pathetic flicker of a desperate and very cowardly hope, that this was all just a bad dream. But there was no waking from what he had done. Ruby sat beside her mother. Maggie in the front row, one of her own, now slightly less fragile, hands on her mother's arm. Maggie's once gaunt frame had begun to fill out with a new warmth, with a new nourishment. Her cheeks carried a new and very beautiful color again. And her shoulders, which had for so long been slumped under the weight of her own very heavy grief, were now straight and very proud. Elias had helped to secure them a new and very safe housing in a small, clean duplex on the east side of town, far, far away from the haunted and very lonely railroad tracks, but close to the clinic where Maggie now received a new and very hopeful long-term care. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd is gathered to greet a different kind of a hero. Shiloh, the sable-black German shepherd, is wearing a new, dark velvet collar, the small and very shiny silver badge on it. The mayor of Ash Hollow is presenting him with the Canine Civilian Honor Award. The crowd claps, and June, her own face, a mask of a pure, unadulterated joy, claps the loudest. Joanie whispers to her sister, "We should make him his favorite treat tonight." Ruby kneels beside Shiloh, her own eyes misting. "You didn't just save me," she says. "You reminded me how to be brave." Later that afternoon, Ruby walked the length of the community center with calm steps and a steady gaze. The building smelled. faintly of fresh paint and chamomile tea. Inside, women sat in chairs with thick cushions and warm blankets. Children played near the window. The center, once run down and overlooked, had become a place of refuge again. Ruby had insisted on volunteering. The coordinator, Carla Monroe, a middle-aged woman with warm brown skin, cropped curls, and a raspy voice shaped by years of chain smoking and court testimony, had been skeptical at first. "You sure you're ready for this?" she had asked. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, sweetheart." But Ruby had only smiled. "I'm not proving anything. I'm just healing in the same direction they are." She spent her days listening. She sat with women too afraid to meet their own eyes in the mirror. She held children who flinched at footsteps. She brewed tea, folded pamphlets, helped fix a broken chair with a borrowed drill. And slowly she wove herself into the place, thread by steady thread. Back home, the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and salt. Maggie had begun baking again, just small batches, just when her hands felt strong enough. Ruby helped knead the dough. June told stories at the table, and Joanie started a journal where she kept drawings of everything that had happened since. The day near the train tracks. "I think Joanie whispered one night that, if we write it all down, it won't go away." Yes. Ruby hugged her gently. "Even if we don't write it down, it won't go away. But this way we can shape it. We can choose how. To remember, on the first warm day of March, when the snow gave way to dirt and the air smelled faintly of thawed wood, the three sisters returned to the tracks. The place hadn't changed much. But this time, there was no chill of danger, no whisper of fear. In the brush, Ruby carried a small apple sapling, its roots bundled in burlap. June brought a small trowel, and Joanie carried the ribbon, a faded piece of red silk. Once part of their own mother's dress, they planted the tree together, just a few steps from where they had first found the rusted and very secret box. "Do you think it'll survive?" June asked. Ruby's voice was soft, but steady. "It will. This place ... it once buried me. But now, it is the place where I begin again." Sometimes miracles don't come with a loud crashing thunder or with the sound of trumpets. They arrive quietly, like a loyal dog leading someone home, like a simple red ribbon tied to a new and very hopeful sapling, or like the silent and very beautiful strength of a young girl who chooses, with all her heart, to forgive the world that had once so cruelly and so completely hurt her. In the darkest of places, God still works. Through the small and through the ordinary, through courage, through kindness, and through a love that refuses, with a quiet and very powerful and very beautiful defiance, to ever die. In our own lives, we may not all uncover secret maps or escape hidden prisons, but each of us is called to notice those still trapped in pain, to be the hands that help and the voice that says you are not forgotten. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a little bit of hope today. Leave us a comment. You read each one and subscribe to the channel to stay connected with more stories of resilience, love, and faith. God bless you, and watch over your family, wherever you are.